Welcome, everyone. I call the July 16, 2025 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to conduct a study session on the Critical Areas Ordinance update. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. City of Bothell is providing the opportunity to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. Please limit all comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment, and remember this during your comments. Also, as we are in election season, I would like to remind everyone that certain campaign-related restrictions regarding public comment on campaigns and/or ballot measures. Public speakers generally cannot specifically address a campaign or ballot issue at a public meeting or during public comment period. RCW 42.17a.555 prohibits government agencies from allowing the use of public facilities directly or indirectly for campaign purposes. Allowing speakers to speak in favor of or in opposition to a ballot measure or campaign during a public meeting or during public comment period would violate this prohibition. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom are asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may also make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information for the public for providing comments. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, please, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone can follow along. At this time, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Jones?
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Here.
Commissioner Lever?
Here.
Commissioner Robson?
Present.
Commissioner Sills?
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson. There you are.
Here, thank you.
All right, all commissioners are present. In addition, staff in attendance include Deputy Community Development Director Gates and Jacqueline Sampson, Planner with Community Development. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand. I will call on you as I see you. This will help avoid the problem of having two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion or second a motion, or participate in debate, and please mute your microphone when not speaking. The first item on the agenda is public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Those speaking will have 3 minutes. Written comments submitted to staff no longer than 3 p.m. were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. And we did receive comments. We received 3 comments that from Betsy Christensen, from Tiffany Bailey, and from Scott Brown. So those comments were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. No one in the audience wishes to speak. Is there anyone on Zoom who wishes to comment? So I think not. All right. Did the person from WDFW, they unmuted themselves. Do they need to be let in?
Yeah, I got the prompt to do so. No, I'm just here to observe, but thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, I just saw you go off mute, so, all right, and the other person watching is also on mute, so there are no public comments. That said, we will move on to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the July 2nd minutes? Commissioner Sills,
Commissioner Sills, I move to approve the July 2nd minutes.
is there a second?
Commissioner Lever, second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the July 2nd minutes. Any comments on those minutes? Looking around, seeing none. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. And I'm going to assume Commissioner Robson also approves. All right, got the thumbs up. So the minutes of the July 2nd meeting are approved as submitted. That brings us to our study session. It's an update on the critical area ordinance, and I will let staff take it from here.
All right, everybody. Good evening. As Jacqueline pulls up the presentation, just give you a quick intro to the critical area ordinance update. So this is a required update that we are pursuing along with other jurisdictions that just wrapped up their comprehensive plan. So we do need to wrap up this update by the end of the year. Within the packet, there was a report provided by Facet, formerly known as DCG Watershed. And this is your first glimpse at it. We'll be back in September and throughout the fall to go through the finer details. With that, pass it over to Jacqueline and we'll get going here.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back after finishing up with phase 2. So I'm back with critical areas ordinances and the SEPA update. So we can go ahead and get started. All right, so Planning Commission action. No action required tonight. The purpose of this meeting is to provide Planning Commission with initial information for our mandatory update with the critical areas ordinance or within Bothell Municipal Code section 1404. This is planned to be finished by the December 31st, 2025 deadline this year. This update also includes potential updates to our SEPA exemption thresholds, hoping to increase those, which is in Bothell, which is in BMC 1402. Okay, so this will be our agenda for tonight. We'll be going over a quick background information on the critical areas ordinance, and then go more into depth with what the information from Fawcett and what those different changes are that we're looking at within the code, and then we'll talk about that SEPA update and then next steps. Okay, and these are our discussion questions for tonight. They're also within your packet, and I also have them on the last slide, so we'll revisit these later in the presentation. Okay, so quick background. April 1st, 1990, that was when the GMA was adopted, which requires cities to designate and protect critical areas. Fast forward to July 2019, Bothell completed our comprehensive update for critical areas policies and regulations. Within 2023, BAS, or Best Available Science Summary, was prepared by Fawcett, formerly DCG, the Watershed Company. And in December 24, Fawcett completed that critical areas ordinance gap analysis, which is also attachment 1 on your packet. And and then fast forward in the future, December 31st, will be our deadline to have this all finished up and wrapped up. Some more background information. So the critical areas ordinance must be based on 1, best available science, the Growth Management Act, as well as recommendations from Ecology and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. If the city adopts policies that differ from BAS recommendations, according to WAC 365195915, it requires those differences to be clearly identified and justified. The GMA also requires special considerations for anadromous fish, such as salmon, which migrate between freshwater and seawater or saltwater. Updates apply only to the critical areas under BMC 1404, so not shorelines. And the shoreline management program is updated to be scheduled in 2029. Now we'll go more into depth with those critical areas. So the following on the screen, we are having no changes to these articles in 1404. This is because this is based off of the Fawcett Gap report stating that these articles are consistent with best available science, or staff felt that current municipal code still satisfies the recommendations given by Fawcett. You can, in the packet, we go more into depth on the comments from Fawcett or the explanation why we believe that the current municipal code still satisfies best available science on all these different particular articles. So if you want to look more in depth, that will be in the packet. So the following two slides will talk about minor changes that we are seeing for the critical areas ordinance. For starters, for Article 1, staff will review and update the relevant definitions to ensure consistency with the proposed code amendments. And in Article 3, we are including the definitions of public agencies and utilities. The specific example of definitions can be on page 8 of your packet if you want to look at that. And the Fawcett Gap analysis talked about exempting small isolated wetlands in Article 3. However, if you look into 1404-510, it is exempt in that part of the article of the chapter. So we believe that that didn't need to have any changes at all. Next, for allowed activities, updating the noxious weed list. The state is currently revising WUI maps due to inaccuracies, and after the new maps and standards are finalized, staff will review and consider any needed updates to the BMC. And then in general protective measures, staff recommend adding standards for critical area perimeter standards, perimeter signage standards, including spacing requirements and referencing a bond calculation worksheet. Okay, and here are some more moderate changes. In general, Fawcett recommend just deleting the whole variance part of the chapter, which aligns with best available science, and we agree with that. So we will be eliminating that section of the critical areas ordinance. For wetlands, we currently Bothell doesn't have any vegetation buffer standards. Staff are looking at peer communities like Kirkland, whose vegetative buffer standards can be found in attachment 3 of your packet, which requires buffers to be fully vegetated with native plants, including canopy trees, shrubs, and ground cover, with restrictions on weeds and requirements for plant diversity. Buffers must be improved when development exceeds certain thresholds. So, for example, adding more than 1,000 square feet of impervious surface. Standards also cover soil improvements, irrigation, planting methods, maintenance, and legal protections. Developers must submit a vegetative buffer plan prepared by qualified professionals before building, and a future standard will be added to Article X of general protective measures. So with that, that's kind of connected to the next point we have, which is the fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. So staff plan to use Fawcett's recommendation for this article, but make one key change, which is including, instead of using site potential tree height to determine buffer size, staff recommend a fixed buffer width based on best available science. The Fawcett report states that a 100-foot wide buffer is estimated to achieve 95% pollution removal and approximately 85% removal of surface nitrogen, which is in alignment with the minimum width recommended by WDFW. So staff propose a standard 100-foot buffer citywide with a 33% increase if the vegetation standards that I talked about earlier aren't met. This approach is better than using site potential tree height calculations, because site potential tree height data is based on broad soil maps that aren't accurate for individual parcels. Calculations are costly and time consuming, and differences between properties are usually too small to really matter. So the 33% extra buffer would only apply when current buffers do not meet the standard. Okay, and above is kind of what, you can see this in the Fawcett document, but this was basically looking at the site potential tree height, that's the buffer width that they were recommending. So it's between 94 to 231. And then, but within the best available science, it was saying that 100 feet does take up 95% of the pollutants. So we just felt that going above the 100 wasn't necessarily needed. And then the SEPA update. So basically, let's see. As part of the critical areas ordinance, staff are considering raising the SEPA thresholds for Bothell. This would allow small to mid-sized projects like housing or commercial buildings to move forward without requiring a SEPA checklist or environmental review. The benefits include streamlined permitting, lower applicant costs, and support for housing and economic development. The goal is to streamline permitting while still protecting sensitive areas through existing zoning, critical areas, stormwater rules, and Bothell already has a strong environmental protections in place. Over the past 10 years, the city processed 194 SEPA reviews and only 3 required mitigations. All others were straightforward approvals. Any changes would stay within state limits and align with current plans and environmental policies. On the screen right now, you can see the thresholds, both what the WAC minimum thresholds, the max thresholds, and then also what peer communities have within theirs. I have Bothell highlighted in yellow, so you can see that we're essentially at the minimum threshold. But in comparison to a lot of the other cities around us, we are far lower. So we would be in alignment with a lot of the communities around us as well if we were to increase our thresholds.
Question about that. I was looking at that tonight. And I'm sorry, I'm an idiot, but does that mean they kick in at 4 units?
Oh.
Sorry. Commissioner Westerbeck here. So I didn't understand this. Does this mean SEPA kicks in at 4 units versus 30, 20, 20? Am I reading that wrong? So we have a way lower threshold where it kicks in for a project?
Correct.
Okay.
So a 4-unit development is exempt in Bothell.
Okay.
A 30-unit single-family subdivision is exempt in Redmond,
Okay.
unless any of the other thresholds are triggered. So
Okay, so just Woodinville, Mill Creek are with us.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, so again, no action required tonight. We're just providing some information, initial information of the critical areas ordinance, as well as a SEPA threshold update. Next up, staff will first review the recommended changes and decide which to include in the update. Staff will then also evaluate updates to non-conformance standards and other topics brought forward tonight. Going back to those, here, let me actually go back real fast. Those buffer standards I talked about earlier. We also understand that increasing 100 feet could also cause a lot of non-conformances because there's some buildings are closer than 100 feet. So we're actually working with GIS right now to understand the amount of non-conformities and how we would need to expand our non-conformance section as well in the municipal code. So go back, forward. There we go. Okay. And staff will take planning commission feedback and create draft edits to chapter 14 of the BMC and return in September for another study session. All right, so here are questions tonight. Should Bothell consider adopting vegetation buffer standards requiring a mix of native canopy, shrubs, and ground cover in all wetland and stream buffers? Does the commission support adopting a fixed 100-foot buffer citywide for all stream types with a 33% increase when vegetation standards aren't met instead of using this parcel by parcel site potential tree height mapping? Does the commission support raising Bothell's SEPA thresholds for residential commercial projects to help streamline permitting? And does Planning Commission have any adjustments to staff's recommendations based on the gap analysis report? All right, thank you.
All right, commissioners. Commissioner Lever.
Thank you so much. That was very brief. Thank you. That was a lot of information and presented very briefly. Thank you. Before I provide my feedback on the questions, I really have this questions around process. I do remember having the presentation on what the steps were going to be taken. And then as I continue to look at the different plans that we're revising, there's a lot of outsourcing of the work, right? And then I look at the financial stage in which we're in, and then when it comes to the reviewing that we're doing, plus the implementation piece, when it comes to resources, in terms of like how resource heavy is doing all this work, and then when it comes to sort of implementing or deciding not to implement, what is that capacity constraint? Because when it comes to approving the recommendations, there's a lot of back and forth that happens internally, and I would like to better understand how do you come forward with the recommendations that may deviate slightly from what the consultant is providing, and then what are the resources that you have internally that help you make those decisions and determinations, knowing that there's a lot going on around planning. And when we come to these meetings, and I know this is not a critique of your work, but more so like the process, it's really difficult for me to really wrap my head around providing a recommendation without understanding the impact. And without really understanding even where are the critical areas that we're discussing. When I look at the GIS maps, I can't really find it. I do know that the data is available or you're like tuning it, but it's really sort of like based on an opinion or my own understanding from where I'm looking at it, rather than facts that sometimes cannot be very delineated, but it's really hard to provide answers to these questions without really understanding the impact based on the analysis. So with all that context that I provided, when it comes to the areas where you are deviating slightly from what the consultant is recommending, one of them being this removal of the checklist, I need to better understand, like, why would we do that? I think every time we come to the meeting, there's another major disaster that happened somewhere, just what's happening in Texas, and we may think, oh, that will never happen here, or maybe that's not something that we need to worry about, and then we do. So can you help me better understand how you came up with deviating from what the consultant is providing, and how time-consuming or how much capacity that's really taking internally as well, because we know that funding continues to just become an issue as we move into implementation. So thank you.
So I think when it comes to, you know, the vast majority of what's recommended within the facet report, we're in line with that, because to say, you know, if they said you need to do X and we said no, we don't, we or Planning Commission, City Council say, well, we'd like to do something a little bit different, we'd need to then find resources to evaluate what that difference would be. We have resources that could, you know, evaluate that hypothetical, what's another path to still meet best available science through an alternative method, if there is one. But that's time consuming. So most jurisdictions are going to do what we've done, where we have a report, here's the recommendations, we're going to tick down that list and say, okay, yes, we understand, we'll update definitions as we see them needed. We went down through the list of all the recommendations, the few that, you know, such as the special flood hazard section, we rely on our experts within our surface and stormwater group within Public Works, and we ask them, do we already meet this? Do we need to do any changes here? And sometimes there are other aspects of standards that we implement. So we can come back with more clarity of, we're not doing what's been recommended because we already do it over here. We already have a requirement over here. A perfect example is the smaller wetland exemption, and no fault to Facet, but every critical area code is a little bit different. We have our exemption section, and if you don't go down into the wetland section, way down in Article 9 or 10 or whatever it is, to find there is an actual exemption for isolated smaller wetlands. We just haven't pulled it up to the main top of the code. We have it there, so we can make that roadmap a little bit more clear, so you can see There's a recommendation and we're following it. There's a recommendation, we are not following it because we already do it. And we tried to lay that out in the memo at this initial stage to kind of illustrate what we need to do, what we don't think we need to do because we already have a code or a standard that's in place, and then where there is opportunity with the vegetative buffer, including a vegetative buffer standard, to add that in to say, well, if a buffer right now is 100 feet for a fish-bearing stream that we've defined, we're adding on top of that to say, well, it's really 133 feet if you have a poorly functioning buffer that is invasives, it is grass, it is not native vegetation. So the intent is to say, well, if you do have a highly functioning buffer, you don't change what that current buffer of 100 feet is. It's 100 feet of native plantings that is cleaning that water that runs to it. It is full of native trees, shrubs, ground cover. It is maintained in perpetuity through native growth protection easements, and looking to do that to satisfy that benefit, as well as benefit for both sides. We would rather see a 100-foot fully vegetated with native planting buffer than a 133-foot buffer of grass or reed canary grass or blackberries or something like that. So to shift away from the recommendations would take resources and time, yes. In every jurisdiction, every city is going through this right now. Jacqueline's working and coordinating with other cities. What are you doing? What are you doing? Woodinville, Kirkland, Redmond, Bellevue, Linwood, Shoreline, and they're all in the same boat of they have reports. They're following those recommendations from their biologists that they've hired. Most don't have. I don't think any of them have somebody on staff, and so that's the resource piece, which we've already funded and had that completed during the comprehensive plan work last year, and we're starting it now as most other cities are because we had other stuff going on. So we can outsource some of that work if we need to. If we need Facet to come in and be here to be the biologist to respond to very detailed in the weeds questions, we can do that. Our hope is that we won't need to if we can show through the report what they've identified as being needed based on best available science, and move forward that way. Does that help a little bit? I mean, and then implementation wise, it's getting through through the code implementation, and then it is just code that we follow with both applicant or city peer reviewed projects.
Thank you. That was super helpful. And I have a follow-up question that comes around like the cost and all of that, because even when it comes to adding those additional requirements, who's responsible for those costs when it comes to sort of like the shared areas per se, and or if it is in fact private owners who are responsible for doing the buffering and all of those items, or identifying wetlands and whatnot. How much are we really talking about? Because sometimes we think about the impact, and then who are we hoping helps us bring the housing that we need within the city of Bothell and do it in a sustainable manner. When I read these materials, of course, I'm not a biologist. I am, the climate is not my expertise, but I really love housing. And of course, as a newcomer to Bothell, I keep on moving to smaller and smaller cities, from Mexico City to now Bothell. And I realized that, I'm really passionate about making sure that we understand how important it is to remain that balance, but there's a lot of work that comes with it. And when it comes to explaining what that really means to people who are going to be impacted by it, that's where I think there's the biggest area of opportunity when it comes to how do we explain this very complex set of information in a way that the public can understand it, or in a way that I can also be an advocate for the work that we're trying to do here, because it's very technical, understandably so. But when we think about the equitable component, if we can just really try to be more simplify it whenever possible in terms of the impact around cost, or what does it mean to have a streamlined permit, and then why are we removing something that will ease the process versus not easing it? It's hard to really get this out of these documents, and then we bring it to the high level, which is great, but then I'm just sitting here with this, then I have to answer these questions, or we have to answer these questions, and then I go back again, like, how do we mitigate? Like, who is gonna be impacted by us going one direction versus the other?
And that's the tricky part with critical area ordinances. We can definitely come back with the mapping that GIS is helping us with to show, here's where the buffers are currently, here's what they would look like, here's the areas that would be impacted. And, it adds cost, yes. We can also return with, here's the estimated cost for a wetland delineation on the average residential property size. Anyone doing a reasonable use permit or doing a buffer averaging, which has mitigation and planting and multi-year monitoring and maintenance, it's costly. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So these are not projects that the community as a whole, in general, want to say, well, let's relax the regulation because we want to achieve X over here, because it's for the benefit of everyone. It's for the benefit of, it's the cumulative impact on that ecosystem that's flowing downstream into a bigger ecosystem, So looking to make sure we've got the protections in place. Programmatically, there may be ways that cities can look to support, work that, and there are ways, through volunteer plantings and mitigation work, there's ways to do that. But that's a little bit outside of the scope of what we're looking at here. It's definitely some follow-up work that we could always look into. But we can come back with, what does it really look like when it comes to adjustments to stream buffers up to 100 feet, and if nobody wanted to do the vegetative buffer standard, what would it look like? And then what the general costs would be for someone to hire a qualified professional to do a delineation on their property. There's that next step of, okay, so you've done a delineation and you find there's a wetland or you find there's a stream and the buffer extends to this point. What then? Can the project somebody was looking to do still work? Are there processes within the code that could allow for development to take place with offsetting mitigation? And what are those costs are generally high. So those are the higher cost, difficult sites to build, which, to be honest, those are the sites that remain in most developed communities around the state. And they're there for a reason. They have not been built out because they have critical areas on them.
Commissioner Jones?
Commissioner Jones, I really appreciate Commissioner Lever's question about process and your answers. It was very helpful. I think whenever we can, sometimes it really helps to see the baseline compared to what's being proposed side by side, whether it's visually and or with dollars and things like that. So I think that's great. I think I have 3 comments. One is, and upfront, I'm not advocating for a different decision. But you said that in terms of Article 9, the city has no intention of updating the enforcement section at this time. It's the one of the areas where you didn't put in a reason. It has to do with enforcement and fines. And I trust you, but I think for the documentation, it might be nice to put in a rationale for it.
For the record, I'll say that, along the line of costs, if there are penalties or enforcement, the fines and the penalties already listed are generally minor compared to what the cost it is to correct. So the cost to remove a structure that somebody may have built without a permit in a wetland buffer, that's really hard to undo. Takes time, takes a lot of money. So that's already a painful process to go through. So we felt that, and we can elaborate on that to say we felt that the work to correct was already enough of an impact there.
Yeah, and I was just suggesting that maybe 1 or 2 sentences on that would probably help us understand the why. Again, not advocating for it. Second comment was, you had one of the questions here has to do about the fixed 100-foot buffer. And for overall, I like the fact that I think the direction you're headed in is simplifying things and simplifying it for both the developer and honestly for the reviewers as well, which helps the process go by faster, and that time has cost to it. So I think that's all good. No concerns about the 100-foot buffer, but does it make sense to look at providing developers with an option to do a site-specific study to reduce the buffer width? So that you can accept the standard 100-foot, or you could, I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't know if it's practical.
And there is that opportunity within the buffer adjustment section that's not being impacted here, where you can do buffer averaging. So you can kind of, I always think of it as a teeter-totter. You might reduce it in one area, but you're growing it in another. And you're creating that opportunity where there may be the ideal space to fit the home or the duplex, triplex, fourplex, whatever it might be, clustered in one corner of the property with a reduced buffer that has a limit that still can only be reduced, I think maximum 25%, while growing it elsewhere. So the total square footage of that buffer is not changed. And then with the vegetative buffer standard added into the code would ensure that it's planted with native plants, removing of the invasives, and it sets itself up for a highly functioning buffer through monitoring and maintenance.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and I think it totally makes sense for the vast majority of situations, and again, makes things simpler. I was just curious as to whether it made sense to also allow for some deviation on it if someone chose to spend the money to do the site-specific study, and whether we should look at that. So that was just a suggestion. And then third and last comment is, or I guess this is a question, is, and it's somewhat tied back to process. So it sounds as if you have a requirement to get this all done by December. I cannot remember if this was on your timeline of all the projects that you have. I remember that timeline had lots of projects, and I'm wondering if it's going to delay or affect anything else that we were expecting.
No, it was on the work plan, on the 5-year work plan with all the X's and the colored boxes. Yes, it was part of that work. Yeah.
Other commissioners?
I have a question which relates to this SEPA threshold. So when it comes to the capacity component, so as we had very detailed conversations or robust conversations around housing and some of the barriers for really getting through increasing our housing, when it comes to removing it, if I recall correctly, based on what I heard and what I read, there are other mechanisms in which we are sort of maintaining the environmental concept of that. However, again, like what are some of the things that we might lose by streamlining it, by removing it? Because I think sometimes when for someone in the outside process, not really knowing what gets lost, if anything, because if nothing is getting lost because you're processing it or capturing through another process, then the way that we're presenting this information can look very different. So this removing of the threshold, how many things will, if any, will get truly lost? Or are they really being captured through another process in terms of the environmental, what do you call the other process? You know what I mean, right?
They are, and that's where we went back and looked at all the SEPA determinations that we had made in the last 10 years, and just, we cut it off at 10 years thinking, okay, anything beyond that is too historic. And we go through a SEPA review for a code update like this, or, any code development, any plan development, we do a SEPA review. We took out anything that was code amendments, so any downtown code over the years. We just looked at development projects. So these are short plats, subdivisions, site plan reviews, large grading permits, and only 3 of them had mitigating measures. They were determined to be a mitigated determination of non-significance, where we established additional measures. One of them was removal of underground storage fuel tanks, which you would think, yes, that's definitely something you want to make sure there are some mitigating measures. If your code doesn't already have mitigating measures built into it, and most codes don't, because you don't see that every day. So the Bothell's code, like Kirkland's, Redmond's, Bellevue's, everybody's codes, they've been built out over time with mitigating measures built in. How tall can a building be? How much lot coverage can it have? What's the tree retention requirements? Things like that. And in addition to critical area protections. So through all of those existing development standards in the Bothell Municipal Code, throughout Title 12, throughout Title 14, throughout the subdivision ordinance of 15, we believe that there's enough mitigating protections built into that to raise it to a level. We haven't recommended anything. That's kind of what we want to get a sense from you. You can see what other cities have done. Just, Redmond went to the ceiling, and they'll use that. They've even incorporated the ability to do the larger number of smaller homes. I think if you're under 1,500 square feet, there's a higher threshold of units you can do for a project that might include those. So we believe that we have a lot of those measures built in to create those protections and evaluations for impacts already. And the floor that's established by the state is what we've followed for years. And over time, cities have incrementally increased them, whether it aligned with a certain type of permit threshold, or they just realized we want to bump it up a little bit more. I've worked in cities that have had kind of in between where we are and where a city like Redmond might be. And through the public process, through the process of notifying residents and owners within 500 feet of a site plan review of a subdivision, we're still going through a public process. We're still notifying the adjoining residents of those larger scale developments. And through that process, we create the ability to receive the input and make sure that we're seeing everything that's on the site. And then we go out and we double check and we make sure there aren't any critical areas. And if there are, then we mitigate for it, and that changes sometimes the design.
Thank you. That's super helpful to answer then the question. So when it comes to the question number 3, then my comments that will be to really be more conservative about any removals, precisely because the areas that may get developed that right now are not developed, there's a reason why, which we just kind of heard, like there might be even more complex that we might never see before. And then I absolutely love the numbers, so thank you for having those numbers when you're like, oh, this many we've processed. But now we have changed so many things, and things continue to change. So when I look at historical and then where we're heading and then how things are changing, I think it might be better to start really kind of continue to track and see how that changes, as so many codes are changing to increase our housing and with all the different plans that we have. So I don't think, given what's happening with climate change, kind of really going with a big umbrella will be in the best interest with the information that I have available. So that's how I would answer that question. So that was super helpful, and yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Sills?
Hi, Commissioner Sills. I have a few questions. I think first, I'm not super familiar with SEPA. I'm familiar with it, but don't know all the ins and outs like you both do. If a developer, acquires like an acre or 2 acres of land and decides they want to build single family homes on it, does that require SEPA review?
If they're going to build more than 4, so if they're going to build 5 homes, if they're going to build 2 duplexes in a home, so 5 total units, then yes, they would have to go through SEPA.
Okay.
So it doesn't.
It doesn't matter that
doesn't
they're
ma-
detached.
Correct.
Okay.
Whether it's a 5-unit condo, a 5-unit townhome, that would have to go through SEPA.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my next question is it possible to temporarily change the thresholds and have it sunset a certain moment so we can kind of evaluate the impact or sort of see what happened? Or is it like just change it and until you change it back or change it again? Like, do other cities ever do that?
I'm not aware of any city, raising the threshold and then coming back later and dropping it. But the WAC does say, here's the minimum. Cities can choose to adjust anything in that chart, from, individual single-family residential structures, units, to how much grading, to what's the size of a commercial building. Ours are set at the lowest end, and have been there for a long time. SEPA generally gives a false sense of security when we already have a very robust code when it comes to protections. And I'm not saying we should blow the roof off of the thresholds. I think we have that ability within our code to ensure not only the critical area side of things, but an unencumbered lot that might be right here in downtown that wants to build 5, 6, 7 units, because that's all that can fit on it. That would have to go through SEPA, where there's an opportunity for SEPA appeal, project appeal, and so on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So I had a couple thoughts. Oh, Sarah, Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. I am generally in favor of reducing SEPA thresholds because SEPA thresholds have often been abused to halt housing. With that said, I do believe that the letters we've received are really well thought out and talk about some important issues that our commissioners have brought up. So I think asking more questions is still justified here. My question in particular about the SEPA threshold is that we noted that there were 3 instances in which mitigation was required, and please excuse me if this was already discussed. Do we know what those 3 mitigation events involved? Was it a small issue that was easily mitigated, or were these 3 really impactful and that we should look into further? Thank you.
Yeah, we can pull what those mitigating measures were. I mean, they would be something that's not already in the code. An example of a mitigating measure that it is in the code is development construction hours. You can only build during these hours of the day. Not to say we would ever, if we needed to mitigate something because it was a really loud project, it had some unique methodology for construction and it was really loud, we could say, well, that we want to, through SEPA, mitigate and say, okay, you can only operate on this day, or for the maybe small window that they needed to do something like that. So you have to, mitigating a measure can't be something that you already have in the code, and that was just trying to express that we couldn't mitigate any of those other determinations because we already had those mitigating factors built into the code. So. But we can definitely come back with what those were, so you can get a sense of what we have established as mitigating measures. Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Lever and then
Commissioner
Commissioner
Lever,
Westerbeck.
thank you. I have another process question. I remember that the King County, and I believe in Snohomish County as well, is also kind of going through the same process like every other city. So since we have both counties, how does their kind of final reviews to their ordinance impact ours? Is like the county governs us or the city supersedes, or how does that really like work? If King County has their own critical areas ordinance, which they're reviewing, and so does Snohomish County. As a city, we're doing the same process, but which one supersedes what? And then how are we how are we tracking how that's going to impact? And are there any discrepancies between one county and the other, as I just happen to be in the line? And it would be quite fascinating that, oh, I can do this here, but not there, and I can see
Right.
both sides.
If you're within the jurisdictional boundary of a city, so you're subject to Bothell's critical area ordinance, not the counties, not whether you're in King or Snohomish County. You would follow the Snohomish County critical area ordinance if you were in the municipal growth area, the MUGA.
Okay.
Or if you were in unincorporated Snohomish County or unincorporated King County, you would follow those critical area standards. And
Okay.
interestingly, if you want to go back a couple of slides, you can see if you're on the chart, if you're in the bottom line, the Snohomish County MUGA, their single-family residence threshold is 30. So if you were across the street or a neighbor to somebody from Bothell to Snohomish County, they wouldn't have to go through SEPA for a 5-unit or even a 30-unit development, but we would. So, I mean, just showing you, and the same could be as we share about a border with Kenmore, with Kirkland. We would have that same differential there between what one city does and what another does. So, just to kind of give you a flavor of what the differences are, but you would be subject to, regardless of if you're in King or Snohomish County. If you're in the city limits of Bothell, you'd follow the Bothell critical area ordinance.
Thank you for that. And then when it comes to the comparison, almost like where we're in the spectrum of where are we? Like, are we like the city of Bothell in comparison to? And you don't have to answer this question, but when it comes to like impact and mitigation, like, and I think this table is the answer to my question, so I need to look at this table. Okay, never mind. Thank you. I'll look at this table.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
All right, it's Commissioner Westerbeck. Yeah, I've got some, I guess, maybe comments more than questions. I will preface this with, I've done at least 2 SEPA checklists, one joint aquatic resources. I had to remember what it was called. I just remember it's JARPA, aquatic resources permit application, and 2 reasonable, or is it 3 reasonable use exceptions because of my line of work. So I've got a lot of experience with this. It's been a few years since I did one, but not that long. So the 100-foot buffer, it's a good trade-off. I was really intrigued with Commissioner Jones's idea, kind of like I think we've done with some other things, like when we had, now we don't have the parking mandates, but where you could do a parking study to see if you need the parking. Because there are some projects where on a smaller site, 100 feet's the whole site. In fact, I had one of those up on Camino Island, and we used a reasonable use exception, and we weren't building in the wetland, but we were in the buffer. So that was intriguing to me. I tend to think, though, the 100-foot, if it gets you through things a little quicker and you don't have to do expensive studies, I'm in favor of that. I've even got projects, like half my projects that seem like are bordering wetlands now, so it's definitely something that affects my work. But I still, I also helped restore the Utah Bothell wetland 25 years ago, so I've got a little experience building them as well when I was a student. So they're really important. But I also feel like within the UGA, we're thinking of those staggering numbers we discussed at our last meeting or 2 meetings ago, that we need 9,500 affordable 80% AMI and under affordable units within 40 years. That's 475 units a year. And if we preserve every little, detached wetland, that's going to really make that expensive and difficult. And we've already got our backs against the wall on that goal. So I'm okay with increasing the threshold and allowing those very small wetlands to be surpassed and filled in if necessary. And I did read the letters. I can appreciate where those writers are coming from. Absolutely. This is just kind of from some on the ground experience and thinking about our future. And I know that council last night pushed back on expanding the urban growth boundary with the preference to just really densify within the existing urban growth boundary, which is what I advocate for as well, which I think means we're gonna be building on some of these less important, less functional wetlands so we can build the housing we need, but so that we can protect truly functional, fantastic green spaces outside the UGA and not build on those, because the Snohomish County Council was proposing to expand it by, I think, almost 400 square acres, or this couldn't have been square miles, but maybe it was a lot, up in the northeast corner. And I don't believe in doing that. And so I'd rather kind of keep compromising and keep densifying existing land within the UGA, and that would mean increasing that opportunity to fill those wetlands. Same with SEPA. SEPA had I think a good run, but I know that we had some state legislation that kind of pulled it back too, because as Commissioner Gustafson was saying, it was being abused to stop projects. So I'm for raising that threshold for sure, especially considering how few we've had that had required mitigation. Going up to the 20 or 30 units, whatever the other jurisdictions have, is probably a great idea. So I'm all for that. Again, with the emphasis on preserving, obviously if it's a critical area within the UGA, we have, like you said, pretty robust codes to protect that, and that should stay in place. I think those are most of my comments, but so far staff recommendations are in line with my thinking and experience, and I would pretty much endorse what you suggested so far. Thanks.
Commissioner Jones?
This is Commissioner Jones. I just wanted to ask a clarification question based on what Commissioner Westerberg said. These changes are to the critical areas, critical zones, right? So this is not changing our practices in terms of filling in wetlands, or is it? Could you explain how that?
No.
Right. I just want to be careful that we're not doing that.
And that was that clarification around the exempted independent wetlands, isolated wetlands.
Correct.
And how we don't have it listed in our exemption section, but we do have it listed as an exempt wetland in our wetlands area section, which.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because this really is about just the size of the buffers, the type of vegetation in the buffers, just those types of things, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, to be clear though, we do allow some, if they're small, like you said in that exception, and I know it was discussed in here a little bit, so I probably made it sound a little rougher than it was, but it is something that gets discussed in projects, as long as they're low function and minor in size, I believe, so.
So this is Commissioner Jones. Yes, completely agreed. I just wanted to make sure we're not actually making a change to that.
Oh, sorry.
That stays there, and we're not.
I characterize it probably poorly.
Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I appreciate the perspective that these are not changes from prior critical areas ordinances, but I still think we can apply critical thinking here to make sure that we still agree with it. I have a question that I think I asked in 2020 with the 1,000 square feet wetlands. I'm concerned that we're perhaps providing a perverse incentive to let our smaller threatened wetlands further degrade. If we have a 1,000 square foot wetland that doesn't score the points for habitat function, perhaps we should be trying to enhance the habitat function there instead of filling it in. My instinct is somewhat in line with the folks who've submitted public comment telling me that we need to scatter these small oases throughout the city instead of concentrating all the mitigation benefits on one site like Keller Farm. With that said, this is an extremely difficult question. It's not greedy developers versus the environment. It is amazing creative builders like Commissioner Westerbeck and many more trying to balance out the best way to save the environment. So thank you all for thinking this through.
So I had a couple of thoughts, and I think we've alluded to this and recognized that we are balancing two goals. Environmental protection is very important, but we've also wrestled with housing affordability. And we're trying to find a balance that best achieves both of them. One of the goals of growth management, as I oversimplify it, is we're going to build it here so we can preserve there. So we are in an urban area, there are services here, and we will see some impacts here so that the green spaces can be preserved. So I try to keep that in mind as we look at this. I started a long, long time ago with wetlands as my undergraduate work. And, you know, I love wetlands. I can tell you stories, but I won't. But, you know, recognizing where we are with housing, recognizing where we are in a designated urban growth center, that has to be taken into consideration too. I'd like to understand a little more the vegetative buffer standard. So 33% increase when standards aren't met. That implies to me there's got to be some sort of biological assessment, the mapping and evaluation. Is that correct?
Yes. So that would be part of, you know, if a site has a wetland or a stream on it, as part of that delineation process, they would evaluate what's the current condition of the buffer. Is it highly functioning? Is it poorly functioning? Is it degraded? And what would be the options of, well, you could mitigate it in that 100 feet from the stream and observe the 100-foot buffer, or you could observe the 133-foot buffer with the existing conditions, and if you could build outside of that. Yeah. But yes, it would. Should somebody say, I've got enough, I have a very long property that can accommodate something being built well away from the buffer. I just need to know where the stream is, where that 133 feet is, and I'm good to go. They could opt for that, and they wouldn't need to identify and consider what the condition was. So it creates some opportunity there for those sites that very well may just be a single unit, or they have the space. But when you're crunched for that 33 feet, you're going to evaluate it and figure out, okay, what is the condition, and how can I improve it to get to that 100-foot.
To keep it to the minimum.
Yep.
Okay. And you know, the other thing you said that I think is really worth repeating is changing the SEPA exemption doesn't change all the other requirements. You know, the development has to be consistent with the plan. This wouldn't allow you to develop someplace that you couldn't ordinarily, and it doesn't waive any of the requirements. So that's part of this. Okay. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Jones.
I just want to emphasize the point that I think just came up in this conversation in terms of the 133 versus the 100. And going back to Commissioner Gustafson's point, which is a very important point about restoring and improving wetland areas, what you just said gives me confidence that, in fact, what's happening here, if we set a buffer standard of 100, is that if someone doesn't want to have to go to the 133, they're going to make real improvements to that area, which is going to help in restoration. And so if I'm understanding it correctly, that gives me confidence.
Commissioner Lever.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Lever over here. So I have, I want to make the comments to the buffer standards and the 100-foot buffer. Can you help me understand who is responsible for that cost? If it is within private property, and I did see the definitions of public utilities versus, I mean, all the clarifications that we're making of who's responsible for what. And I am all for really making sure that we have a buffer standard that really will help us get where we want, finding that balance, and providing some education on like how much that's going to cost. And we talked about that earlier, and also who will be absorbing that cost. And as part of the recommendation that moves forward, it will be helpful for me to also understand when does this compliance come into play, right? So if you're all of a sudden finding yourself out of compliance because you happen to be not within all of that, do you get kind of like grandfather in? It's like, well, this is gonna be effective January 1st, and then even if you're out of compliance, the city will not be kind of making the owner bringing you to compliance, because then in fact that might be a cost that you can absorb, and then thinking of being able to like live here, right? If it becomes extremely expensive to maintain my property because of all the other regulations, that will be kind of helpful to know. How do we then support the existing owners, mitigate costs that you might have to absorb as we're trying to really protect the environment and build more housing?
Yeah, so should this move forward and there's a structure, a home, a multifamily building that is pushed into the buffer, they don't have to do anything. They're existing legally. You know, we created a nonconformity. It's a legal nonconformance, and that's where what Jacqueline mentioned. We'll need to expand upon our nonconformance chapter. How can an existing legally nonconforming structure be maintained, modified? Can it be expanded? Those are some questions that we'll bring back in September to consider what seems reasonable. Most cities, you know, for example, they'll say you can maintain that building in perpetuity. You can re-site it. You can fix your walkways, everything on the building. Replace your windows like for like. It is there. We're not going to make you move it. We're not going to make you expand or increase your buffer plantings. So in no way would we expect to establish a vegetative buffer and impose that on anyone without doing anything. It's development that would trigger that requirement, and that development on that subject property. So a single home that has a stream in the backyard, and it goes across many homes. And this is not it's not North Creek, and it's not Sammamish River, so it's not a shoreline jurisdiction. It's just a stream. That home, that single lot, would be the one that's proposing to redevelop, tear down the home, build a duplex, tear down the home, build a triplex, build a replacement home. Then we'd look to say, well, comply with the buffer standards. Make sure the structure is outside the buffer, whether it's the 133 feet or the 100 feet, and follow those steps. But it would just be on that site. So those are the decisions that somebody would make in redeveloping based on whatever that threshold is. And typically it's, you know, you remove the structure, you're going to make the entire lot come into compliance with those standards. If you're just reciting it, if you're adding a small addition, where can it go? How big can it be? Those types of things. Are there some offsets that might need to take place? So those are some of the detailed in the weeds questions we can get into in September with an example non-conforming section. We're going to take the opportunity in August to build out a few things as we have recess and maybe some time to do it.
Commissioner Sills?
Yeah, Commissioner Sills, I just wanted to say, kind of related to that, and related to this, but more on the proactive front. I know, I think during the pandemic, the city of Bothell did like a webinar on if you are near a wetland or have, you know, a backyard, like basically instructional on how to plant native species and do various things. So I would say that that's also really great programming for those existing homeowners that do want to do something but maybe don't have the resources or don't know what to do. And I found it very useful as a very inexperienced gardener myself. So I would just say like programs like that can be great too, where we're looking kind of beyond the code, but also encouraging people to kind of adapt to what we're trying to do with this new development as well.
Commissioner Lever?
Thank you. That's a great point, and I have a idea or comment per se around the funding. And thank you so much again for the public comment, because it really shows, one of the commitment that we have to protect our environment. But protecting the environment can be expensive. So I wonder too, where is like private funding, if at all, in this mix? And when it comes to the role that the city plays to bring resources that we know are very small, and I know there's some nonprofit organizations that help with that, but I think piggybacking on that, there's definitely an opportunity to engage people who are interested. And when we do receive comments, and when we do know that there is a commitment and desire, being able to plug us in with the organizations that can help us really be actively in having that project that will help make sure that we are all sort of like contributing in the space that we want. So yes to that, and then I encourage us to really look at for more partnerships.
Commissioner Jones? No? Okay. So we are talking about requirements to identify the boundaries of these buffers with signage at specific locations. I'm thinking about the recent case that happened, not exactly analogous, but where people went and cut trees outside their property. So, okay, this buffer is established. During construction, you'll be monitoring it. Code compliance will be there. 5 years later, 10 years later, how will we be ensuring that those buffers are maintained over the long term? Is it a matter of somebody seeing it and calling in a complaint, or what's?
That is the age-old question of, establishing, in perpetuity maintenance of and upkeep of a critical area. Planners often say, congratulations, you bought a wetland, and you get to maintain it for the rest of your time in this home. If it's a reasonable use project, you're surrounded typically by a wetland or a buffer. So there's definitely opportunity to seek out, methods. We do rely on complaint base. If there were enough hours in the day, we could make sure any new owner of a property that has a wetland, we could take the time to go through, here's how you maintain it, here's how you ensure the invasives don't take over. It follows, monitoring and maintenance follows the best practices and sort of what we would typically see after 5 or 7 years. The native vegetation has taken hold. It's a lot harder for the invasives to get in there. So if it passes the test after that period of time, it's less likely to degrade, or it degrades slower. But inevitably, there's blackberries, morning glory, ivy, all those things that can, knotweed, that can get in there and wreak havoc. So there's opportunity, and no one has figured out how to ensure that other than regular compliance methods. But outreach and education is definitely a way that we could. We know where they are. We have the parcel numbers, and we could educate anyone that lives in a residence, owner or resident within a critical area. There's opportunity for that. There may be grant funding that we could look at in the future, and we can. I need to go back through the climate action plan and see if there's policies and strategies within there. But it definitely makes a lot of sense to have that sort of approach, to at least do what we can do without being everywhere all the time.
So are these buffers identified on the deed?
They would be. They'd be on title for the, whether it's in a native growth protection easement or in native growth protection area, or a separate tract. They're on title, and they're there. And they do show up on the county assessor's map, or our historic documents, especially the newer ones, which we have all digitized for the last 10 or 15 years or so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking 2 or 3 owners down the road. Are they going to be aware of those requirements, or do they just pull up the signs and say, I can expand my backyard, which I've seen? Commissioner Jones?
It's Commissioner Jones, and I'm going to disclose up front that I have a conflict of interest saying this, but the University of Washington Bothell has an excellent conservation and restoration science program, and the students are required to do projects, real projects for real clients throughout their curriculum. And a partnership with the city might be something of interest, whether it's for the educational piece or for some of the actual restoration piece to help homeowners. So it might be something for the city to look into if they chose to, without any pressure from me.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
I want to ask another question. It's more of a follow-up to Chair Kieran's question, and maybe I didn't completely understand on the uptick. The 100-foot buffer is designed to make the experience a little more streamlined, less expensive, no studies. But you do have to establish that 100 feet somehow, and you talked about that in the, what do you need the 133 or not? Is the idea that that would be a lesser study that costs less? Because the city's not going to go out there necessarily with their consultant and delineate it. But they still have to do some studies of the plants and the soils and things like that, would they not? I'm just trying to understand that better.
Right. There would still be a delineation study. If there's no wetlands on a site, it's a lot more streamlined.
Okay.
And it kind of depends on, what someone's quote's going to be.
Right. Because then you're quickly into the, we had like the type 1, the type 2, et cetera. If you're into the type 2, it's like, well, gosh, I just gave up 50 feet and I'm still spending 10 grand for the study. So I'm kind of wondering about the benefits of the 100-foot if there's not a real benefit to reduce study costs. And I know you can't answer that right here. That's why it's a question. Because I'm about to pay for more of that right now, and it won't be cheap. Not hundreds of thousands, though, tens of thousands.
Other comments? Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Commissioner Gustafson here. I would like to encourage exploration of Commissioner Jones' idea. I would love to see a wonderful team of environmental investigators go out and monitor what's going on and give high fives to the people who are doing a good job, and then have to offer their services to the ones who aren't doing a good job at the expense of those folks. Because I'm being a little bit flippant here, but this is really important because monitoring is difficult. If we say no one's figured out how to ensure this other than outreach and education, we really need to think about having a good program in place, because otherwise we should just stick with the original buffer and just assume that people are not going to do it because it is such a cost. So I would love to hear more about Commissioner Jones' idea here.
Just as an aside, the city did work with the university a number of years ago on outreach to different small businesses as we were looking at displacement, and they did a really good report. So there is precedent for that. Commissioner Sills?
Commissioner Sills, I just wanted to say I think one of the responses also made a plug for working with University of Washington Bothell and that they had a really good program. So just want to acknowledge we got that from the community as well.
Commissioner Oliver?
Yeah, Commissioner Levy here. I think on that note, the other thing that I want to add is really having that outlet for us, a community coming together. We are becoming a more and more polarized nation, and then when it comes to not really seeing eye to eye, I think these type of opportunities can really help us come together in a way that is very intentional. But I also know that there's a capacity constraint. So when you come back and then as you continue to do all of this, it will be super helpful to really understand what are those capacity and funding constraints, so that we may have all these ideas and it's great, but at some point there's some things that are gonna give. And we also know that many of us do want to help, and just really having the opportunity to understand where those gaps are. I also think about Cascadia College. I mean, we have a wonderful community, and we could really benefit from having these outlets where people can donate their time and talents to really make this community be what we want to be and get to know one another. Because I can definitely see they're so complex, and then, of course, we're not gonna be experts, and then it becomes me versus you. And when it comes to planning and environment and everything, I am, like, my heart is really around the community as well, and making sure that we understand each other. So this is something that I will also encourage you and welcome the opportunity to hear more about how we're moving into that direction. So as we have people coming forward, we can actually plug them into something where their input and their feedback can be implemented right away.
Other commissioners? So would you like a sense of the commission on these questions, one by one?
Ideally, yes.
Okay.
Just a sense, just a temperature reading. I
Okay,
think is all would
we will
help
do
us.
that. So we'll look at the first one. Should Bothell consider adopting vegetation buffer standards requiring a mix of canopy, shrubs, and ground cover in all wetland and stream buffers? Sense of the commission, I see heads nodding, yeses. So you've got a yes on that. Next one goes to the fixed 100-foot buffer with a 33% increase when the standards aren't met, instead of parcel-by-parcel mapping. So more of a standardized approach than the individual. I see some, I see a little bit of uncertainty on it, but mostly yes. There is some concern, but
And you heard my questions and concerns about it, so I'll at least throw it on the record.
I think there's leaning that way. I'm influenced by the fact that the mapping isn't that accurate anyway on the parcel by parcel. So I'm not sure about the benefit versus the cost. Do we support raising the SEPA thresholds for residential and commercial projects? Looking a little more mixed. There are concerns there. A number of commissioners say, nobody says no, but a number of commissioners are somewhat concerned. I guess the question I had written down didn't ask, what kind of notice would there be absent SEPA for these smaller projects?
If it were let's say there's I'll pick 6 or 7 or 8 unit multifamily building,
Which is exempt under the new process.
which is, it would be, it would go through SEPA. It would not have a public process. It would be a straight building permit. We do have site plan review permits that do have a threshold requiring it to kick up into a public process. Those are typically larger. I mean, thinking of Block D, 102 Main, they had a site plan review that looks holistically at the full site. I mean, both of those may not be good examples because they were probably going to hit the grading, the soil excavation threshold anyway. So, even if a project is exempt on the number of units, if the grading exceeds the grading threshold, SEPA is required. So that's typically the trigger, and that is pretty low when you think about. I mean, it's many dump trucks to get to 500 cubic yards. It's many more to get to 1,000. But SEPA really looks at what are the impacts to upstream, downstream impacts for that grade change that might be taking place.
Commissioner Jones?
Commissioner Kiernan and staff, I think what you're hearing from some of us is not necessarily no, it's just more information so that we can understand the trade-offs.
Everyone agree on that? All right. And final question, kind of the open-ended one. Commissioners have any adjustments to the staff recommendations based on the gap analysis report?
My question is actually still related to the SEPA. When you come back, when it comes to the recommendation from the consultant versus what you're recommending, like maybe being very specific on what that variance looks like. And if I understood it correctly, the city is being more conservative, like we wouldn't just like blanket remove it. And if that is the case, that's great. But I also continue to think about the capacity. So if you're asking like what might be missing, really like the cost associated, who's carrying that cost, and whether or not the city has the capacity to do what we're hoping to do. It's like this North Star that we have, which is great, but is it attainable? And if it's not attainable, what would be the recommendation that we can actually, follow through to the end? And that would be great. Otherwise, it turns into, it becomes very punitive just for those who are able to absorb the cost and or happen to not be reported and or whatever the case may be when there's a violation. So it will be super helpful to just understand the who and how much as we are moving through the recommendations.
Okay, and just to clarify, SEPA is completely separate from that reporting. We're tagging this on as we've seen it. Staff has seen it over and over again as something that we want to investigate, and this seemed like the opportune time to do it. So SEPA is not part of the facet report or any recommendations. That's strictly coming from staff. And since we were opening up the critical area study, it's critical area ordinance, we wanted to get your feet on SEPA as they typically go hand in hand. But when you're talking about mitigation and critical area protections that are built into the code, SEPA is usually right alongside that, taking into consideration what the impacts of a project might be through that.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
This is related, but not necessarily on topic tonight, but it is SEPA related. I know doing small projects in downtown, I did my 4-unit years ago. There was the overlay or whatever that was exempt from SEPA because they'd done the work to basically do SEPA enlarged for the entire downtown area. Is that right?
That's right. So if there's that's the one wrinkle. If there's a planned action ordinance,
That's
which
it, planned
there
action
is,
ordinance,
that encompasses the downtown as well as Canyon Park. So that has already evaluated the impacts for residential units, traffic, commercial square footage. It's set that cap, which we adjusted back in
That's right.
at the end of the comp plan, and then we finalized that this February. But
Bumped it up a little bit, anyway.
it sets the number of residential units. So a project in downtown would not be subject to an independent SEPA because the planned action ordinance has already evaluated that and set the total amount. We're just following what the code has established for.
And did that not cover the new building?
It
under
did.
construction?
It did. So
Okay.
yeah. So 102
And
Main
then
was
Alexa.
not a good example.
I was curious if what did I miss
Yeah.
something where
Nope.
if you go over
Nope.
100 units or something like that? No, okay.
Yeah.
Because you're taking into account the number of homes
Correct.
and businesses and cars and so
Yep.
forth. Okay, traffic. Thanks.
Okay, does that give you the feedback you're looking for from us? And when you come back, you will be addressing the written comments we got?
Yes, we'll provide some responses within the staff report and integrate that into the staff memo as we can.
Okay.
And always looking for, we look for opportunities where we can provide imagery, whether it's examples, real or imagined, of here's what we mean by a buffer reduction. We will continue to work with GIS to come back with maps to provide. It's hard to show the entire city on the screen, but we'll try to give examples of here's what the buffer is, here's what it would shift to, and then draft code examples of vegetative buffer standard, what the edits might look like, just to get that conversation going, so we can get into those weeds.
All right, great, thank you. I think that's it for this item then. Thank you for bringing this to us, and Jacqueline, thank you for your good work on this. We always appreciate hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we move on to reports from members. Members have anything to bring to us? Did everyone see the story in the Seattle Times about Bothell? If not, look. It's about the parking requirements being waived. It's a big story, and it's got lots of comments if you scroll down to the comments. Oh, I'm sure it's more now. That might have been when you left.
Okay, this is Commissioner Jones. Fortunately, we know that staff is coming to us with a parking study shortly.
Other reports from members? Seeing none, reports from staff.
A couple items. So this is our last meeting until Wednesday, September 3rd, where we have the Urban Forestry Management Plan study session scheduled. The fall is going to be pretty busy. We have meetings planned with usually 2 or 3 items to get through. Trying to give a variety of a study session versus an update versus findings, conclusions, and recommendation as we move through some of these items. On the parking management topic, that is slated to go for a study session with City Council in September. I don't recall if it's September 16th or September 9th, but it is one of those dates. So that'll begin that conversation of how parking management will look throughout the city. And then finally, just a reminder as we step into the downtown sub-area update work, the housing action plan work, though keep an eye on Engage Bothell. Those projects will begin their public engagement as we brought on a consultant to do that work specifically for us, doing both targeted and general outreach. And then finally, the climate action plan will be available online for commenting, providing comments throughout the document through August, so we can continue to move that forward into the fall.
All right, with that concludes our business. There being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
Commissioner Westerbeck, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second? Commissioner Sills.
Commissioner Sills, I second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 7:33 p.m. Our next meeting, as Deputy Director Gates said, it will be September 3rd. I hope you all have a very nice rest of the summer and see you in a few weeks.